Well now, a huge welcome to you to my channel, The Magic of Java. This is my fourth book in the series, and this is called The Phoenix and the Creatures of Darkness. Now I want to emphasise that this is a novel, and only a novel. Yes, it is based on real people, even some celebrities, and real events. But I need to apologise to you if you feel you've identified yourself, because that was never my intention. The intention is for this simply to be a novel, an entertainment for fleeing Jakarta once more. I became aware that people were travelling around the island of Java without a test certificate or letter of approval from the local police, both of which I had assumed were essential during the lockdown. In fact, I'm sure that I'd read it and that this was the case, as it was in a reputable newspaper. And given that news is drying up in Indonesia, I could not be confused by a plethora of sources. Cecilio returned from Boyolali to visit us in Jakarta and explained that there were no requirements, but compulsory testing was taking place at a few service areas. It was Imlek, Chinese New Year, and the now much reduced news had hinted that further restrictions would be announced after people had returned home. Nevertheless, as Maddie's birthday was at the end of the month, we decided to chance it and try and return home after her birthday. My arthritis was returning with a vengeance, along with bad asthma. Probably a reaction to me smoking once more. I don't know why I kept smoking, but somehow I felt stressed, validated by the herpes returning to my foot. But what alerted to me that maybe something was wrong was that the pain in my foot came back strongly, along with really bad constipation. Now, of course, I will suffer from these very regularly in Gunung Kidul, but what was different was how this began subtly and slowly builded up to become very strong. The opposite to what I've become used to. Despite having little to do in Jakarta, for some reason I'm more preoccupied and have less time to contemplate. So maybe in Gunung Kidul I'm more aware as the symptoms begin and able to deal with them better. It therefore came as no surprise when Maddie announced that she could smell a dead man in our bedroom. On questioning, she could not smell the sewage smell that I regularly smell in the bathroom, and I realised that we were probably aware of the same phenomenon, but I had somehow rationalised it. Indeed, I've never felt comfortable in our bathroom, and I'm beginning to understand it's not the layout and untidiness. Maddie had a bad night that night and was sent into a sort of panic. I'd not seen her in since we fled Jakarta over 3 years ago. I could not really feel anything within Maddie when I placed my hands on her, but was aware that the light seemed to be leaving me. Maddie said that she wanted to return home as soon as possible, even though Pakana would be away on a meditation retreat for another week. What disturbed Maddie so much was that both of us there was a familiarity about these effects, which she believed would lead to losing her mind again. Indeed, I'd not seen a panic like this in over 3 years. They erupted on Imlek, the Chinese New Year, and I immediately thought of Su Cheung. I began speaking to Su Cheung once more. As before, he was initially aggressive, questioning why I addressed him as an old friend, but slowly began to accept me, as he had before. When I became aware of Su Cheung, I was sure that he'd been sent by his son-in-law, Pa Erte, but later forgot about Su Cheung and believed that our problems originated with Omuni. Now, with his reappearance, I'm not so sure. It seemed to me like so many of the spirits we became aware of in our home in Gunung Kidul, they're simply lost souls who reside with us and not sent to us. The widespread use of black magic in our desa, and particularly by our brother-in-law, must attract spirits, and so too will Omuni's use of black magic. But maybe the biggest reason for Su Cheung being here again is that he believes this to be his home and is regularly fed by our Chinese neighbours. It seems to me that whatever we're experiencing would simply pass, possibly with the end of the Imlek holiday. But thanks to the health crisis, we can no longer book a flight and leave Jakarta at short notice. And quite possibly after Imlek, we'll not be allowed to leave Jakarta at all. So we booked the night bus for the next day, and Maddie seemed very relieved. Yet another consequence of the restrictions. It's the potential panic, is a potential to create panic, fear, possibly harm, and huge expense. Maddie cast doubt on my interpretation. It would seem that Parkano had confirmed this to be a Genderuwo, the very large spirit of Javanese folklore which is sent to kill people. Often they are believed to be ape-like and hairy, like a paranormal Bigfoot, but neither Maddie nor anyone else had mentioned this to me. The Genderuwo is said to derive from the spirits of people who died violently by suicide or accident and didn't get a proper burial. Their spirits are stuck in this world, and those who lived as bad, evil people, well, when they were alive, become evil Genderuwos, and those who are kind become good Genderuwos. The same is true of the spirit which Pa Angabaya claimed to have found in our kitchen some 4 years ago, and the same that Maddie had seen at Pa Ustad's home in Jemba that was going to kill his wife. I'm not convinced that the spirit had recently been sent to us, as we are aware of so many Dukan that had been paid in the past to cast spells to kill us. It's entirely possible this was one of the many spirits that had been enlisted to kill us, who now spotted his opportunity. Genderuwo liked to eat crow satay and a sugar palm sweet kododol, which he'd recently been eating in our home. In fact, the ritual to raise a Genderuwo is to offer crow satay while repeating a mantra. I now realise that this was the significance of the burung chamani I found sacrificed on my roof in Jakarta over 3 years ago. Genderuwo are said to kidnap people at night, especially if these people are angry or tense at dusk. You may recall that I've often hypothesised that our own anger is a source of the paranormal activity. Well, could this be related? I'm not at all sure if it is the Genderuwo which makes us angry, the anger which attracts it, or it's simply a metaphor for a state of mind. But I have many times noted that if I had bad feelings at dusk, I'm likely to be affected that night. Maybe this is the Javanese seeking a paranormal explanation for a psychological effect, which is yet to be discovered and given a scientific name. But it is very real indeed. All this happened just after I'd received a message about memory being constructed, and assured by my father that my ancestors were looking after me. But then this always seems to happen when I'm just beginning to reject the paranormal in favour of a more scientific or metaphysical explanation. Its effects return often strongly. At this stage I'm much less concerned with intellectualising this, as I am in reducing the effects. It also occurred only 2 months after Parkano had assured me that nothing could harm me now, and that I had the ability to heal myself and others. Again, such tests always seem to appear to test my conviction and confidence. What I can be sure of is that once we had decided to leave, I had 2 very large poos in a single day and felt considerably lighter as a result. This feels to me like another test. Maybe the most determined I have come across, but it feels like I've passed it. I was later listening to Josephine McCarthy, my favourite magician, a wise lady of my age, originally from Bradford. She reminded me that as I became stronger, so would my adversaries and their tests of me. So does this mean that the Genderuwo will always be in our house, and it's not about defeating him, but learning to live with him? I think it does. Both of us will grow in strength, and he will continue to torment Maddie and I. But I can remember what I have learned, and so not to panic as we did before. I will be able to counter him. This does not mean that it will be a constant battle. Indeed, the best way to counter him is not to see it as a battle. Now, often we will be aware of him, but how will this not trouble us, and we will not trouble him? But when I'm feeling at my most powerful, and like I'm a victor, he will attack again, simply to test me and remind me against pride. After the events which occurred 4 years ago, I have no doubt about their validity and origins, but let me assure you that the physical effects are very real. Now, I'm perfectly happy to concede that this was simply the subconscious creating stress which resulted in these physical ailments. But then I believe everything is constructed in this way, so this hardly provides a unique explanation. I noticed that after we bought a ticket to return home the next day, a smile and happiness returned to Maddie's face, and maybe it's as simple as that. She wanted to return home, but outwardly Maddie will tell you that Jakarta is home and that she is happiest in the city. Widati simply believes that her mother is tired, and having waited on an adult daughters, caring for their every need, which is true. But Titi was unable to feel and understand the problems even before her mother. To a certain degree, this is the final straw in Widati's plan for an operation at Pondok Indah Hospital. The cost is prohibitive, but it would now seem that Maddie could not be in Jakarta for 6 months looking after her. I'm getting my wish of returning to the mountains now, with Maddie more resigned that this is indeed our true home. Is this the universe intervening on my behalf? If so, as always, it does so in strange ways. Our last night in Jakarta, we were largely untroubled, sleeping soundly in the knowledge that we would soon be home. Although the next night on the night bus there were some minor ailments, but nothing to take away our anticipation that we would soon be home. The sense of relief on finally arriving home was immense, but nothing like as it was when we first fled Jakarta. But both of us now knew this is our home and not simply a refuge. We were unable to open the door, and I realised the lock has slipped as it's prone to. Despite it being 2:30, Maddie called Yanni for our back door key, but could not reach her, so we collected it from her house. I realised that this must be the reason we got locked out all these years ago, and that the Duke brother was not to blame after all. Why should he have been? Mass Predictor had taken the deeds to our home, and not him. Then Mass Predictor had blamed the Duken and charged us what was a lot of money, at least to an Indonesian, for a new lock. In fact, the lock slipping is more about bad fitting than it is the functioning of the lock itself. So now I'm beginning to see Mass Predictor as more the villain than the Duken brother, who always takes the blame for everything that goes wrong in the desa. Yanni had cleaned our house somewhat prior to our return, the main problem being the lizard poo, which accumulates like dust in the UK. But there were many places with mould on it, including our bed sheets, a product of leaving the home during the raising season with no fans on. The garden was overgrown, and there was much to do. All these small tasks, which punctuate my days, weeks and months in the desa, would now be a full-time job for around a week. What we knew We knew not what to do first, but found that the Wi-Fi had been cut off, so our first priority was to pay that, which without Wi-Fi necessitated a visit to the office. So that was the reason why Maddie could not call Yanni. This highlights how completely dependent we've become on our connection, even halfway up a remote mountain in Java. When we fled the last time, we were without Wi-Fi for many months, and yes, it was a problem, but now it seems impossible, even for a few hours. 2 months later, we received our council tax demand in Gunung Kidul, and it's still not in Maddie's name, despite having spent some considerable time and money getting the correct name on our deeds. Those of you who have read my first episode will recall that an early indication that our neighbours were plotting to take our house in Jakarta was that the council tax demand was in Bar Annie's name. This had fed my paranoia that we were ensnared in a complicated criminal plot to defraud us, and that Pa Erte had not issued demands when I was stuck in Gunung Kidul looking after Mawa, the name Parkano gave to Maddie, and the one that I used to signify when her mind was still very disturbed. Now it seems likely that these simply reflect the incompetence of local government in Indonesia, especially as the lower tiers are unpaid. But under Jokowi, everything is becoming formalised, and every document is meant to match the other, with the onus on them doing so being with the citizen and not the incompetent official. So in the future, such errors could create huge problems for the citizens. Once again, Maddie sorted it out by going to the appropriate office in Wonosari, and much to the amazement of the officials there, who assumed that all mountain dwellers are illiterate imbeciles. Nevertheless, there were 2 major errors on her home address, which does seem to confirm that these problems are due to endemic incompetence. Nevertheless, I wonder if Maddie is making a big thing out of what others simply accept. Both our home in Gunung Kidul and, surprisingly, in Jakarta are classified as agricultural land, for which the administrative arrangements are more informal, and therefore officials are unconcerned about precision. So our concern is a little bit like being concerned that the utility bills in the West misspell our names, at first impression seemingly trivial, but utility bills are increasingly being used as proof of identity, such as when opening a bank account. So this error on a utility bill could have a major unforeseen consequences. I have and do rely on Maddie for everything in Indonesia, but she has only limited experience of dealing with government, as in the past had relied on Prama. Has Maddie's paranoia regarding bureaucracy and black magic affected my thoughts to such a degree, and that I have constructed criminal plots against me and my family to explain the traditional beliefs and practices within Indonesia? You may well now be thinking that the series of events which leads to our near destruction were fuelled by our own paranoia, and I think I'm coming round to this view. Certainly Pa Erte was defrauding us, but this was relatively minor from his position of Erte. Indeed, probably his most complicated fraud attempt was to claim that Maddie's marriage certificate to Prama was a forgery. Despite this subterfuge costing me a lot of money and inconvenience, he gained nothing from it. It is also clear that Omuni did not use black magic, some of which is directed at us. There is the evidence of the dead crow on the roof and the painting of the tree, also on the roof, matching one in his home. I also believe that the liquid Bahani spread over our perimeter each morning contained soil from a graveyard. But did any of his magic actually affect us, rather than simply feed our paranoia? Were the paranormal, or let us simply call them phenomenal, which are yet to be explained by mainstream science, takes over, is how Maddie and I were all aware of the subterfuge from Omuni and Pa Erte aimed at us. This is because we are the INFJ empath personality. We can really pick up on the feelings of others, even if we're on the other side of the world from them. We don't often know who it is. wishing us harm, nor that what they're actually doing, but we do pick up on the fact that something is happening. It is also common for empaths to hear voices or believe something unworldly is communicating with them. Some call this their guardian angel. Again, this could simply be an empath attempting to rationalise messages which we receive. It was these rationalisations which Parcano removed from Maddie, who believed were her Nenek and host of legendary characters. But do not doubt, if we do not receive these messages and insights into the world that science cannot currently explain. The next morning, all rallied round to support us as they could, confirming that this was our home and the place we run to and not from, especially Yanni's son, who had missed Maddie so very much. Indeed, he now expressed his jealousy when I'm affectionate towards her. When I see Maddie with Yanni's son, I am reminded of what a wonderful mother she is and how devoted he is to her. Somehow, the way they are together is the complete antithesis of how I remember Branwell and his mother. In fact, many people came to see Maddie just to be with her. It became obvious how much she is loved in Odessa. I've said it before, but it's worth restating. It's not impossible to love Maddie, and those who wish her harm must hate themselves and the whole of humanity for what they want to destroy, something so joyous simply because it is joyous. As I looked over the mountains, I could see and feel the welcome home from their spirits. I have to say that following years of nomadic life, it feels so good to have a home that is not a shared space in another's, which is how Jakarta now feels under the chaotic tyrant that Widati is slowly becoming. She's only nesting as her mother does, but without any idea of how to cook and run a household. In common with most of Indonesia's trendy young, Widati subscribes to a minimalist philosophy. But her interpretation is to declutter her room of anything unaesthetic and to place these objects haphazardly around the rest of the house. I've always felt that places have character. I believe that this was shaped by their architecture, human and physical geographies, but now feel that it's also about their spirits. Whilst working in Birmingham, it became associated with hard work and little joy. Indeed, like its industries, Birmingham's entertainment is organised along Fordist lines. When I first moved to Manchester, I felt an oppressive sense of danger, mixed with excitement as I approached the city. I don't know why I felt this, as I'd been living in Leicester, not a small city, but I wonder if I could feel the spirits of those who'd previously lived in the city, and could feel their misery, fears, and indeed joy. I might not be a good gardener, but I do care for the land and not exploit it, and this gives me a connection to it. I'm now tied to the seasons, the weather and the daylight in a way that I would never have felt possible. Maybe I'm beginning to understand why my father loved arable agriculture and gardening so much. It's the great feeling of attachment and being needed, which the land reciprocates. But I believe that the spirits are everywhere, within each plant, each tree, but above all the physical features, especially the mountains. Now my attachment to the mountains is nothing new, having grown up Shropshire, but maybe at last I'm beginning to realise that I need them. The assumptions we currently make about mankind, that we're happy to live in apartments in huge cities, happy to toil in offices or at home in a virtual world, fed on food stripped of any value and consumer trinkets, a world created and based on the assumptions of the ruling elite, to have our lives scrutinised and planned along Fordist lines, having broken all connection to the land and God's abundance. Right now our time and movements are micromanaged. Don't leave your house. Don't visit your loved ones. Don't go on holiday unless you're a celebrity. Watch the news. Wear a mask. Get vaccinated. Don't use cash. Don't criticise or raise a question. Only demonstrate for issues which have been approved and endorsed by celebrities. Now, there may be valid reasons for all of these, but certainly they don't feel like how God wants us to live. There is something manufactured and unholy about this world compared with my mountain. It turned out that the internet had not been cut, and that very morning the provider came round to resolve the issue. So telling the differences between life in Ardesa and in Jakarta, it was actually the wind that during the rainy season, which had interrupted our satellite connection. In Ardesa, relationships are based on trust and helping each other out, the way Allah intended. Whilst in the city, even minor things become huge problems, which take so much of our time to resolve. Although Maddie's phone would still not connect, and I realised what a fool I'd been. It's a new phone and she'd not yet registered it on our Wi-Fi, which of course had not been on anyway, illustrating how we forget about these simple things when faced with a larger problem. Later that day, there was a storm and out went the internet again. But that is life on my mountain. We live with nature and not against it, knowing that ultimately it can never be tamed, however important man believes himself to be. I was still suffering a little arthritis, unable to have a good poo following the long journey, but we will recover. Again, I need to get back into a rhythm with nature, a rhythm our bodies, and release the stress and oppression of the city. It may even be that we need the benign spirits of the mountain back in our hearts before we can dispense with the fear and hatred which is consuming our world. Ever since I became aware of the importance of defecation to my feelings, I've tried to understand what's happening. Undoubtedly, defecation is expelling unwanted material from our body. But what is this material? Is it simply a mixture of poisons and pathogens, disease, a spirit, a jinn, energy? Or maybe all of these are just different perspectives on the same theme. Could this be the reason why Dalits are employed in handling and moving excreta, and why they're considered untouchable? Because it's possible for this material to jump to them. Certainly as a Muslim, I conform to very strict codes related to toilets, including not to bring sacred objects into the actual room. Is there something in my observation? Then surely we should pay more attention to our bowel movements. Maybe not to the obsessive degree which Germans do, but yes, pay more attention. Because this could be a valuable part in keeping our bodies healthy. It would also suggest that we should use enemas and colonic irrigation more frequently as a part of our overall health. Interestingly, I find that Ghana, Benin and Gabon are not only enemas common, but there are a variety of herbal preparations used for different medical conditions. Needless to say, my optimism about the internet was short-lived, and we continued to experience a very poor service. Ultimately, we were told that the trees below us had grown, and especially when in full foliage at the end of the rainy season, the signal could not reach our receiver, and the only solution was to increase the size of the tower. Whilst this did make some sense, the variability of the service we received made none at all. But they really had us over a barrel, as unless we paid for our tower to be lengthened, we could not complain about the service. Indeed, I became desperate for a solution when the internet was on, and believing that it was unnecessary when it was off, reflecting to the degree to which we have lost patience with life and rush headlong into snap decisions. Being without the internet for many hours each day emphasised just how dependent we've all become on it, especially when we live in areas where mobile phone signal is often inadequate for internet access. Add to this often lengthy power cuts more than once a week and you'll comprehend my frustration. Even reporting problems can be impossible, for like most Indonesians we rely on WhatsApp for text and calls. Compounding my problems, my computer really needs replacing, and whilst attempting repairs my internet connection kept going off. Just as I was requesting a new password, having forgotten one I probably hadn't used in 6 years. In the 6 years I had had the computer. These are the issues we all face on a regular basis. But can any of us honestly say that our lives are enriched as a result? The inevitable happened, and Windows finally gave up on my computer. I only managed to recover things by allowing it to delete my programs, including a professional edition of Office. Needless to say, in moving to Indonesia, there were so many things I didn't bring with me, including my office key. But as I was contemplating having lost months of work, including the book, I realised that maybe this was a message to stop getting caught up in the rat race of my own creation and to consider what I really wanted out of life. Not least as we suffered a 3-hour power cut during the reinstallation. Despite resolving many issues, I'm now trapped in a rat race of Microsoft's creation, but decided I should see this through. Indeed, I was reminded of how when I was running my business, I went to bed many times unable to sleep, so anxious about issues like these. As the modus operandi is so important in identifying the perpetrators of crime, can we be sure that Kim Jong-un or Vladimir Putin are behind the increasing ransomware attacks and not our old friends on the guest list of Little St. James? But Microsoft was the eventual loser, as I downloaded open source alternatives, which I'm finding to be more than adequate for my needs. It also highlighted the impossibility of introducing digital currencies to our data. What will they do? Push on regardless with the same cavalier attitude they have towards electronic connections? Will this create a two-tier society, those able to trade and buy goods and services, and those who cannot, those living in the 21st century and those in the 22nd? But maybe we're blessed because I'm sure that not long after the West is covered by the 5G networks and the digital currencies are imposed, a security crisis on the internet will lead to it being dramatically restricted to commerce with multinationals and government bureaucracy. But the wonderfully anarchic space will disappear. Having already seen off all those physical archaic spaces, maybe my somewhat conservative data will come to be seen as a beacon of freedom. Such a paradox as the world embraces a new dark ages, somewhere so backward, will be at the vanguard of our future. I recalled how my business used to offer online solutions, largely to the public sector, and I'd always get a question about inclusion. It went somewhere along the lines of how can your online system work for people with low bandwidth, or even those without any connectivity, maybe without a computer? Perhaps my response was flippant, because of course our online systems could not be used by people who are offline or without computers. What I hadn't realised was that our systems were being considered as a replacement to the traditional delivery of services, that our database of services was actually seen as a replacement for physical guidance and counselling. Perhaps this does shed some light on the crisis we are now in. Have governments around the world been sold AI, robotics and applied systems like digital currencies as a panacea for all their problems? Like all large-scale computer systems, there will always be massive cost and time overruns, so we will be in limbo for years. Then, when they fail to live up to their promise, I was going to say when implemented, but I should say if, as so many big systems never come to fruition, or at least not on the first attempt. Many frontline workers will have been made redundant, although this time it will include managers. But those at the top will have been rewarded for reducing the wages bill with massive increases in theirs. Then the actual service will have deteriorated drastically, maybe even to the point that many service users will stop trying to connect to the service providers. These users will be counted as satisfied customers, and the whole system will be seen as a massive success. But in its wake are disgruntled employees and customers who one day will reject the technology and the reason for its outpouring of Luddism and a nostalgia for the good old days. Maddie started to get unexplained bruises on her legs once more, as apparently did Widati in Jakarta. Now, the last time Maddie had felt that she was being poked in and around the vagina, but this time they were completely unexplained. One was very large and impossible to be the sort of bruise you pick up and are unaware of. I also felt as though I'd been kicked in the ribs, a feeling which lasted over 2 weeks, despite having no recollection of having walked into anything nor been hit. Incredible though this seems, people have been known to develop such injuries from lucid dreaming and under hypnosis. The roof in Jakarta leaked once more, so Maddie called her hairdresser to ask her husband to sort it out. Only a few days later, the hot water pipes also sprang a leak. Or was this the same leak? The hairdresser explained that she'd seen a Genderuwo in her home, but that it didn't seem too troublesome. She also explained that the Genderuwos love human women, and that when Maddie could smell it, it's bending down to kiss her. Furthermore, any attempt to impregnate human women, and that Widati and Titi were to be careful. Could this explain Buddy's growth? And my belief that Uni was sending babies to women in the kampong to sacrifice their aborted children. Apparently Titi was also aware of the Genderuwo and seen it many times in the kitchen. In fact, it played with our cat and had become quite friendly. Titi was not particularly concerned about it. This raises the obvious question, do I believe in Genderuwo? The answer is no, not really. But there clearly is a force in our home, which is often in the kitchen. For those brought up with Javanese mysticism, they interpret this as a Genderuwo. But the bigger issue for me is, have we got it wrong about Uni? At least partially, as our home in Jakarta is what is commonly described as haunted. Well, maybe partially we have got Uni and piety wrong. Both are somewhat frightened of us, of what is in our home, and even more frightened that we seem to be happy to live with them. Almost certainly both tried to use the circumstances to pursue their own agendas, but just maybe many of our problems originate with other energies that we share our home with. The man who never alters his opinion is like standing water and breeds reptiles of the mind. William Blake, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. Later, Maddie contradicted my thoughts once more. She told me that she knew Uni kept a Genderuwo and that this had been sent to harm us. Indeed, it was the Genderuwo that Maddie had smelt when she visited Uni's home, when she returned from Manchester. She went on that in the past she had sent a female version, Genderuwo, although some believe this to be the Wewe Gumbel creature, to us. But now this was definitely male, and proof that Uni was still determined to harm us. In addition, Paete had told Maddie that he had seen a Genderuwo in our yard on previous occasions. I must create a system to be enslaved by another man. I will not reason and compare my business to it. It is to create. William Blake. Maddie asked me to top up the money in her bank, as it was now very low. But I'd done so before we went to Jakarta, and in Jakarta I had paid for everything, or so I thought. It would seem that the 5 or so packages arriving at her home each day were being ordered by Widati and Titi on Maddie's phone, and therefore ultimately with my money. Only a small number were samples as a result of being influenced. So I'd unwittingly spent $700 on clothes and skincare for my 2 stepdaughters, when I'm not buying anything for myself, including a new laptop, which I desperately need, to at least be able to contribute towards Widati's operation. I felt betrayed and let Maddie know this. Maddie started to cry. At first I believed she was unhappy with me criticising her daughters, but I later realised that she really agreed with me and was worried about them. Maddie had given so much to provide a good start in life to Widati and Titi, including her own body, and now they seem to be taking her for granted, as everyone does. Neither do any work around the house when Maddie is there, and Titi even when she is not. We Dati, and increasingly Titi, insist on the best and have the lifestyles of Jakarta's celebrities without earning money. Both are hypnotised by their phones, spending hours on them, and neither achieve anything, nor seemingly happy. For Widati, time is running out to establish her career, get married, repair her leg. But how can this be achieved when she stays in bed until 3 o'clock? Maybe parents the world over are experiencing this, and it is simply the brutal reality of a generation who will never enjoy what their parents did. But could Maddie's anguish be the energy which creates the Genderuwo? I'm now much more inclined to see these things and not the other way round. Maddie naturally believes in Genderuwo, but even this belief could be creating the energy within the universes we both share. This would mean that all of the spirits and creatures of man's imagination do exist within universes created by him, but these are not often universes which others shares. It is true that in the past I have argued that humans are plagued by mental parasites which feed off our emotions in a similar manner to narcissists, so maybe I should accept that this is indicative of Genderuwo. We left Gunung Kidul 2 months ago, as happy and contented as can be, and after only 2 months in Jakarta we are sinking once more into despair. We both need to higher our vibrations and find the light once more. The Dukan's wife started working in our garden, as there was much to do, having been away for 2 months. Maddie explained that she had said that there was no work as a result of the health crisis, and that the family really needed money. This time I started to cry. I know it was illogical, but here I am, unable to pay for Widati's operation, being mean with myself, not replacing my laptop, and was still seen as a source of funds by all around. Maddie could not understand why I was crying, and the little money we would give to her family would not make a dent into the cost of Widati's operation. So maybe it was that I felt helpless to fulfil what everyone expected of me. After all, I have already let down Branwell, so maybe I should simply accept that I'm powerless to fulfil all of my obligations. The next night, Maddie did not sleep well, and I got up early. Like all empaths, I knew that she needed to rest and wanted to do everything I could not wake her. Probably like most empaths, I was so concerned about not waking Maddie that I did exactly the wrong thing and woke her up. Maddie was annoyed with me and grumpy for some times, feelings Maddie hardly ever has and never shows like this. I was reminded that when we lived in Jakarta, we would periodically begin to distrust and even resent each other. So is this the influence of the Genderuwo, who attempted to disrupt the relationships between wives and their husbands? Certainly the constant nagging rheumatic pains, slight headaches and a lack of sleep do begin to make you feel grumpy. But why resentful? I reminded Maddie that the only way to fight this was through love, and that meant trusting and believing in each other. When some items of clothing arrived in the post for Maddie, I could not hide my concern that our feelings of resentment returned less than a day after we'd resolved to work together. On top of my rheumatism, I'd been suffering from chest pains, and this interaction seemed to make things worse. Maddie rubbed my chest with eucalyptus oil, and I immediately started burping. The implication to both of us was obvious, that our pains and emotions were the results of paranormal activity, despite knowing that this does not make it any easier to deal with, but deal with it we must. Our outpourings of emotions are reminiscent of how we felt when I took Maddie to the UK. At the time it was though there was a deliberate attempt to split us. But I also understand that Genderuwo are known to induce these feelings to create marital disunity in order for them to have the female to themselves. I reminded Maddie of how we felt that evening in the hotel in Manchester. We both felt that we would die, and I thought that this was solely the result of lead poisoning. To my surprise, Maddie told me that when I left her in the hotel in Manchester to meet Branwell, she had been overcome with the feeling that I had left her stranded in the UK. Yes, thanks to my ex-partner, I had been away all day, but I had agreed that I would be away for some time and that she needed to catch up on her sleep. I left her with a little money, but she said that she would not go far from the hotel. I had no idea that when I was away, Maddie had panicked and called Steve and a German admirer, both who'd agreed to help her out, even come to the UK to rescue her. When we are feeling normal, such incidents seem beyond comprehension to us both. But when we feel emotional, such feelings are very real and dark. I realise that we all have mood swings, but these are so dramatic and pronounced. Yet I don't believe that either of us suffer from bipolar or any other depressive disorder. I was looking over to Yanni's house and spotted the ghost of an old lady in a brown hijab. I was studying this apparition when Maddie called out Ibu Pijat. So it wasn't a ghost, but Maddie's massage lady. Maddie got a massage later that day, but apparently Ibu Pijat fell asleep onto Maddie mid-massage. Maddie was trapped for some 30 minutes, far too polite to do anything about it. Maybe nothing to do with the paranormal that we were so aware of at the time. Or was it? Whatever, it was certainly amusing and just what we needed after all these negative thoughts. Basimko was a friend of Maddie's mother, and is everything an elderly Javanese lady is imagined to be. Hard of hearing to the point of being deaf, her short stature bent double, her dark face ravaged by wind and sunlight, framed by a jilbab, and always with a broad smile and cheeky laugh. She visits us early in the morning, about once a week, to sell dry goods and occasionally produce from a garden. Maddie always buys instant noodles, as she remembered how kind Basimko had been to her mother. I once walked back from the Passar with Basimko, and she told Maddie how we'd been chatting away in Javanese, which of course we hadn't, but she couldn't hear my Bahasa nor English. I later learned that she's 2 years younger than I. She was delighted to see that we'd returned. I noticed that despite going from home to home, she did not have a face covering, which were supposedly compulsory even here in the mountain. Maybe no one had told her, or more probably everyone had told her, and she had no idea what they are talking about. And had she would simply been amused that some of her fellow villagers believed it. Despite not being understood by the locals, I resolved to quarantine for 10 days, not visiting the masjid nor Passar. But Maddie took an ojek to the Desa to stock up with household items. She tells me that nobody is wearing a mask, despite us having been told that it's now compulsory in the Desa. I guess most are like Basimko, and would neither understand nor believe the reasons for it. My concerns about Widati's leg and my inability to provide a solution were relieved by Maddie's brother number 3. Yes, he is a wise and kind man, but he's the illiterate brother and therefore not really seen as a deep thinker. But the brother reminded us that in Indonesia's market economies, doctors have a financial incentive in scaring patients, that without spending money their problems would become calamities. That Widiati had now twice visited the doctor at Indonesia's most expensive hospital, and each time he'd warned of dire consequences, unless we find an increasing fortune in Indonesian terms, proved the brother's point, not the gravity of the situation. Readers will forgive this Brit for being so slow. You see, we're brought up with the NHS. I still see doctors impartial as impartial and not salespeople. That Widiati had visited one of the most expensive doctors in Indonesia meant that he was one of the most effective salespeople, not necessarily the best surgically. In many respects, he is the medical equivalent of Ki Pramanawa, the Dukan Pulsu, who stole Maddie's gold, who I described in the Dayak Snake oil salesman. Indeed, such sales skills would be a prerequisite for working at one of the most expensive hospitals. My brother continued that many people in Indonesia live with injuries like Widati's, and given that the bones were now grown and set in the wrong direction, it would be safer to leave things as they were. Indeed, he spoke of many people whose operations had not been successful, and this had resulted in them being more disabled than if they had done nothing. It's true that maybe when Widati got to 50, she might experience problems walking, as do so many people in Indonesia. But with a life expectancy still only around 60, this was hardly a disaster. Maddie spoke with Widati, who no longer wants to talk about the situation, and maybe this is how we should leave it. A very emotional episode in which Widati demanded the most expensive brand simply because she associates cost with quality, as she does with everything in her life. Not only is it time to move on, but maybe it's time to celebrate and, yes, treat myself, because this scarcity mentality has worn me down. But maybe at this critical time for humanity, there is much more to learn from this episode, and that is when science and greed coalesce, the result is calamitous. For how long can we follow the advice of experts and leaders who have a stake in the outcome? Maybe now is the time to follow the fool, a very rude description of brother number 3, but somewhat valid. Semar Messen, the Wayang fool character, is once again proved correct. Certainly both Maddie and I need to follow our hearts, as taking the advice of others has caused us so much anguish over the years. Well, that concludes this chapter from my 4th book, The Phoenix and the Creatures of Darkness, and it's actually the final in this series of books. I'm not saying I won't write another book, but I feel this series is now complete. I really hoped you enjoyed it. And now I'm going to add a new chapter every week to this book. So if you want to hear about it, subscribe and hit the bell. Now, I'm not doing particularly well with these eBay, YouTube algorithms. So if you could hit the like button and make some comments, I think it helps me. I hate to ask you for this. I hate it when I hear people coming out with this sort of statement. But the truth is that this has been like a full-time job for the last 4 years of my life. And I'm still a long way off from receiving any money whatsoever for it. So I really do need to, I suppose, beg you. Subscribe, like, make comments, and thank you very much. Thanks.